Alone Show. The show welcomes a brand new challenge. The production team has selected 6 experts from past competitions and dropped them into the cold Labrador Island. If they can last 50 days, they will win a prize of $500,000. They will face North America's fiercest top predators, but their skills and physical strength are stronger than ever before. This is the return of the champions. The first contestant is Callie, who lasted 89 days in Season 7. However, she suffered frostbite on her toes due to the prolonged exposure to the harsh Arctic conditions and was forced to withdraw. This time, she comes prepared. Upon arrival, she notices her first challenge. She is positioned facing north, where fierce northeast winds blow constantly, exposing her to a cold environment. While exploring the area, she finds bear droppings on a hunting trail. With over 10,000 black bears on Labrador Island, Callie is both scared and excited. If she can hunt a black bear, victory will be within easy reach. She enters the woods looking for a place to sleep. The second contestant, Mark, also faces a challenging start with many areas around him being marshy. He walks on the beach looking for a sheltered spot. Mark participated in Season 7 and lasted 44 days, enjoying fishing and eating meat until he became depressed on day 35 and contracted trichinosis, which forced him to leave the competition in his closest brush with death. After returning home, he resumed normal life and bonded with his 3-year-old son. This time, he wants to set an example for his son to never give up, making this journey one of redemption. Mark speaks softly, careful not to attract the attention of polar bears, the most brutal bears, as he is not ready to face them yet. The third contestant is Amos, an Indiana native who is setting up a makeshift tent as the sun sets. He wants to rest as soon as possible. He lasted 58 days in Season 7, encountering gray wolves and catching big fish, living a thrilling life until he could no longer find food and became emaciated, leading to his reluctant withdrawal from the competition. Before leaving, he burned down his shelter, leaving behind a memorable scene. As the main support for his family, he aims to create a better future for his children, making the prize money essential. At night, he gazes at the beautiful moon and swears to persist until the end. On the other side, Mark fell asleep to the intermittent howling of wolves. Callie woke up to the chattering of a fearless little squirrel. Fortunately, it was only the second day and Callie was not yet hungry, allowing the squirrel to escape unharmed. Today, Callie planned to scout the land for fresh water sources and a sheltered spot. As she walked along the beach, she unexpectedly found a wooden plank. Contestants can collect and use anything they find. Today might be Callie's lucky day, as she also found some rope washed ashore by the waves. She continued to explore, and soon found an ideal spot for setting up shelter. Using the rope, she tied a log between 2 trees as a crossbeam and draped a tent cloth over it to create a makeshift dwelling. Meanwhile, Amos was collecting food along the shore, planning to enjoy a hearty seafood meal. In a short time, he gathered a pot full of clams. Given the constant dampness and likelihood of rain, Amos planned to build a shelter after his meal. He then went hunting, hearing the call of a grouse. Drawing his bow, he shot an arrow at the grouse, which flew away with the arrow. Shocked, Amos quickly followed, spotting feathers along the way. He was sure the grouse was hit and imagined how great a grouse soup would be for dinner. Unfortunately, aside from a few feathers, there was no sign of the grouse. Reluctantly, he returned to work on his shelter. Labrador has one of the coldest currents in the Atlantic, with windy and cold conditions. The damp environment can easily defeat a person, so Amos placed great importance on building his shelter. He started constructing a frame with wood. On the other side, Callie sat by the shore and witnessed a spectacular sight. It seemed like a whale was stirring up the sea. Labrador is home to the world's largest population of humpback whales. After enjoying the view, she decided to take a walk. It was low tide, and the ocean grocery store was open once again. Callie hoped to collect some seaweed or mussels. Suddenly, she noticed a group of crows gathering around something on the beach. As she approached, she found a large piece of seal skin with a heap of fat still attached. The nearby coast is known for its orcas, famous for hunting seals. The seal skin had washed ashore. Callie cleaned the seal skin, which smelled fresh and seemed edible. She began cutting the seal fat into small pieces and placed them in a bucket nearby. Callie's survival philosophy is to think from a perspective of abundance. She saw this barren land as full of opportunities, finding many things she needed, like the seal skin that was about to become a delicious dinner. After some time, a nutritious and tasty seal fat soup was ready in front of her. She eagerly tasted it, enjoying the rich flavor of the fat. She couldn't help but remark that seal fat contains a higher concentration of fatty acids than natural fish oil and has traditionally been used as a laxative. Callie thoroughly enjoyed her meal. Meanwhile, Amos had set some traps hoping to catch small game. Soon it began to rain, and he took shelter under his tent to drink some warm water. It rains daily here, so he went out to check his traps. The first one was empty, but he continued, hoping to find something to eat. Perhaps his prayers were effective, as he found a snowshoe hare in one of the later traps, looking plump and promising. He quickly cooked a pot of meat soup, which tasted exceptionally good, especially after being hungry for several days. It was a satisfying meal he eagerly devoured. Meanwhile, Mark was scouting outside in a damp environment. He had not yet found a suitable place to build a shelter. After searching, he finally found a relatively dry spot. He planned to build a triangular cabin and cut down many trees for it, a process that required a lot of physical effort. Mark continually motivated himself while missing his family. He knew this was a rare opportunity, but his son did not understand why he had left. Mark himself was also confused, questioning the purpose of being far from family in a remote wilderness. He experienced negative emotions, but decided to suppress his doubts and continue building. However, once inner demons surfaced, they were hard to dispel. The more he tried to overcome them, the more he missed home. Ultimately, he succumbed to his feelings and chose to leave the competition after just 5 days. He realized that family companionship was more important than money and decided to return to his son. This season of The Alone Show, starting in winter and set in one of the most desolate and remote places on Earth, was undoubtedly the toughest. The first 3 contestants out included one who found a seal skin, one who caught a rabbit, and one who couldn't stand the loneliness and left the competition. The 4th contestant, Michelle, was drawn by the beautiful scenery here. Coming from Maine on the East Coast, she felt a sense of familiarity. She had lasted 21 days in Season 8, failing because she couldn't find food, losing 20 kilograms in 20 days. Now, with a second chance, she was full of confidence. Her confidence was not due to improved hunting skills, but because the terrain was on an island. She was confident that just by eating mussels, she could last 50 days. The 5th contestant, Wonia, was also filled with anticipation for this competition. She had lasted 73 days in Season 6, a journey that was regretful yet enriching. She was deeply committed, and her love for the experience made it painful to leave. She didn't want to leave, but her body couldn't hold up. Now, she had another chance for redemption, which she cherished immensely. Right at the start, she found a bottle, signaling good fortune. Although there were plenty of mussels on the shore, it wasn't time to gather food yet. Due to the weather, contestants arrived on the island in the evening, so finding a place to spend the night was the first priority. The 6th contestant, Greg, was a pragmatist with no time to admire the scenery. He needed to find a temporary place to settle among a few trees. He had lasted 51 days in Season 3, but had to leave the competition due to a shortage of food and an accidental fall into a river. The cold and hunger were too much to bear. He had always lived in the jungle, and the only change in his life was that he was now older, at 58, but wiser. This time, he planned to win with wisdom. For safety, he chose to build his shelter in the woods. However, his main concern was polar bears. An encounter at night could mean certain death. He had already set up a temporary tent and went out to gather firewood, only to spot bear droppings on the way, confirming the area's dangers. He felt a slight melancholy, having never seen such a dire situation where a man spent a lot on a tent cloth, only to find it was a substandard product that leaked, soaking his sleeping bag. But he didn't panic. Instead, he planned to use a black waterproof cloth, intended for camera equipment, as a replacement, and brought the camera gear into the shelter. He hadn't eaten all day and was now hungry. He took a pot and went out to look for food. Mussels were the most common food here. At the age of 12, he had bought a book titled The Art of Jungle Survival, which had fascinated him and influenced his life. Over the years, he had memorized various survival skills, from fishing to setting traps. Picking a few mussels was an easy task for him. But how could a hunter just survive on mussels? So he decided to use mussels as bait to catch some tasty fish. Fishing was his specialty. With confident steps, he stood on a rock. The sea likely held many fish, though the waves were a bit rough today. However, such difficulties were trivial for a professional. Despite a mishap while casting his line, it didn't affect his grace. By feel, he sensed a fish on the line, but ultimately, he only pulled up seaweed. It turned out to be a false alarm, making this the worst fishing spot he had ever encountered. Moreover, the tide was rising, but it brought many large, beautiful mussels. So, it's true that a loss may turn out to be a blessing. Eating mussels could still lift his spirits. He decided to go back and cook the mussels, but then realized his pot was missing. Oh no. Had the tide swept his pot away? Without it, survival would be impossible. Greg was deeply frustrated, cursing his own foolishness for fishing at such a time. He searched hopefully, but the pot was nowhere to be seen. Greg felt like crying, thinking nothing could be worse. Perhaps it was time to go home. But fate can be strange. Just as he was about to give up, the pot miraculously appeared. The joy of recovering the lost pot was immense. He almost wanted to tie the pot to himself. While enjoying the delicious mussels, his spirits revived. He thought about setting a trap for seagulls, as eating meat surely beats this. He drove 2 stakes into the shore, preparing to make a bird trap. A seagull's meat contains about 300 calories. Unable to catch fish, he thought of other ways to make life easier without struggling for food. This was the wisdom of an experienced contestant. When a seagull goes for the bait, the trigger is set. He placed the bait away from the trap and used several ropes as snares, hoping the seagull would step into them. As it came for the bait, the trap would trigger and entangle its legs. That's the principle of the trap. Do you understand? Honestly, I didn't get it. Greg was very pleased with his creation. He always enjoyed trying new ideas. Michelle was building a shelter, but found bear droppings everywhere in the forest, which was concerning since both black bears and polar bears were prevalent. After searching, she found a spacious spot in the woods and began cutting down trees. She constructed a tripod with 3 logs to support a horizontal beam, the other end of which rested on a tree, secured by 2 logs. Suddenly, alarming sounds came from the seaside. Fearing it was a dangerous animal, Michelle went to check, only to find it was just the roaring waves. Wanya decided to build her shelter on the edge of a cliff. She chopped a few trees and set up a tripod for the horizontal beam, which she smoothed with a stone. She used rocks as one end of her shelter, saving a lot of material. Soon, she had the basic frame ready and draped tent cloth over it, then covered the sides with turf. That was enough for today. Michelle was gathering food. Mussels were the easiest to obtain. She planned to make the most of this resource. If it meant eating mussels every day for 50 days, so be it. Michelle was full of hope for the future. On the other hand, Greg was tired of eating mussels. He heard seagulls and decided it was time to check his traps. Unfortunately, the waves had destroyed them, and he was nearly depressed. He had hoped to win with his wit, but after 6 days, he was fed up with mussels. Doubts crept into his mind, suggesting he should go home. Meanwhile, Michelle felt a stomachache coming on. She drank a lot of water, which somewhat alleviated her discomfort. On the other side, the tent cloth Wanya had prepared turned out to be of poor quality with holes in it. Perhaps she and Greg had bought from the same place. Water had pooled on the tent cloth, leaving her cold and hungry. Reality hit hard, and just 6 days in, all 3 were struggling and suffering. What happens next remains to be seen. The Alone Show is not only a test of the contestants' survival skills, but also a competition of endurance and intelligence. Greg, seasoned yet strong, aimed to win with wisdom. Unfortunately, the weather was not on his side. Continuous rain soaked his bedding, and tumultuous waves disrupted his fishing plans and destroyed his meticulously designed bird traps. Despite being a top-tier hunter, he was reduced to surviving on mussels, which reminded him of his harrowing experience in Patagonia, when he nearly froze to death after falling into a river. The biting cold and hunger had tormented his soul, and he could not let himself suffer again, leading to a surge of inner demons. At that moment, he profoundly stated, "Time mercilessly ages us. This is a young person's game." Deciding to retire from the contest, Greg left with his unmatched wisdom. acknowledging that knowing when to retreat is also a great wisdom. Now, with 44 days remaining, only 4 contestants are left, each potentially earning $125,000 in prize money. Watching a plump seal lounging on the rocks and basking in the sun, Callie was captivated by its form, which seemed oblivious to her gaze. The approaching low tide meant the beach would soon be littered with mussels and seaweed, her primary food sources. Mussels provided protein, while seaweed offered greens and vitamins. She used these along with seal fat to make her stew. The seaweed, kelp, is used medically to treat thyroid disorders. Callie was very satisfied with her lunch, especially enjoying the flavor of the mussels, though she noted their small size. About 100 mussels weighed only 1 pound, making them quite laborious to eat. Elsewhere, Amos was trying to start a fire, but the damp environment kept causing him to fail. After many attempts, he finally succeeded in lighting the tinder. To keep the fire going, he needed to prepare more firewood. The driftwood was quite old. Amos swung his axe and started chopping, feeling like he was becoming one with the natives, beginning to understand the trees, the ocean, and the surrounding wildlife. He developed a sincere love for the land, a connection missing in modern society. He considered this journey a spiritual practice. Amos carried the wood back to camp where he would split it into firewood for easier burning. Chopping wood is an essential part of wilderness survival. He raised his axe and struck, but it wasn't going smoothly. Now feeling tired, he noted that chopping wood for an hour burned about 500 calories. Fatigue makes accidents more likely. As he swung his axe, a piece of wood flew up, seemingly striking his leg, but it was just a scare. His leg was fine. However, he needed to take a break. On the other side, Wania sprayed pepper spray on her bed and some clothes. The canister was supposed to have a safety feature, but it had fallen off at some point, leading to the accident. The next day, she dealt with the sprayed areas on her raincoat. Knowing that the fabric absorbed well, she continually cleaned it with clay to prevent the pepper oil from reaching her neck. Despite the trouble, she maintained an optimistic outlook. Michelle reinforced her shelter. With the tide out, she seized the opportunity to collect some marine food. To her surprise, she spotted a grouse ahead, a rare delicacy. This week, Michelle had only eaten mussels and was desperately hungry. She spotted a grouse entering the forest and patiently waited for the right moment. When the opportunity came, she decisively shot an arrow and successfully hunted the grouse. This was the first time she'd caught any food in her 2 participations in the contest. She was very grateful to the grouse, not only for the food, but also for boosting her confidence. At this moment, she truly felt like a real hunter. She planned a delicious dinner, pairing the grouse meat with cranberries to enhance the flavor. Once the meat was cooked, she tasted it. The tender chicken melted in her mouth, making for a memorable meal. During low tide, Wania collected mussels frenziedly, which seemed inexhaustible. She stored them in shallow water areas, ensuring a continuous supply of fresh mussels. She gathered about 7 pounds of mussels, but realized she had left the bag behind when she tried to move them. By then, the tide had risen, and the bag was floating in the sea. It was a crucial resource, and she had to retrieve it. Braving the cold seawater, she shivered as she got the bag back. Michelle was using moss to insulate her tent as the weather grew colder, aiming to increase the shelter's warmth. Callie, having seen a grouse while fetching water but without her bow and arrow, returned to camp to arm herself and set out again. As a top hunter, she knew the importance of being one with nature. To hit any animal, she needed to focus intensely, with only herself, the animal, and her bow and arrow in mind. By discarding all distractions, she would awaken all her senses, making the surroundings eerily quiet, as if only the sound of breathing remained. Once the animal showed a flaw, it would face a thunderous strike, the epitome of hunting. Callie embodied this skill, and when she released her arrow, it seemed as if the heavens and earth changed color. Unfortunately, she missed the grouse. Puzzled, she wondered how it anticipated her move with such a soulful dodge. However, her current priority was retrieving the arrow that had flown over the woods and into the sea. She braced herself and entered the icy water, shivering as her teeth chattered. Her feet were prone to frostbite, having been frostbitten before, so she needed to warm them up quickly. With 41 days remaining, Amos was attempting to fish, an activity he had enjoyed since childhood. Although he could see fish in the water, they weren't biting, and soon the tide rose again. Amos was left with no choice but to continue eating mussels and seaweed. He found it impossible to catch fish in this cursed place and decided to shift his focus to hunting black bears instead. The next morning, a heavy rain started, bringing Wanya to tears. She had chosen to build her shelter on the edge of a cliff and did not anticipate that the rock wall behind her would start leaking. Her sleeping bag was soaked through, and she was frustrated by her poor choice of shelter location, almost crying over her own foolish decision. Hours later, the rain cleared and a rainbow appeared, seeming to sweep away her gloom. She was reinvigorated to reinforce her shelter, collecting driftwood from the shore and carrying it back. The weather was unpredictable. By afternoon, it was raining again with strong winds, hinting at an approaching storm. Wanya hurried to strengthen her shelter, continuously inserting pine branches into the gaps, hoping it would withstand the storm. Perhaps fortune favored her, as the storm unexpectedly ceased, and her spirits blossomed anew. Meanwhile, Callie was enjoying the rare sunlight. Amos appeared relaxed, and Michelle was smiling brightly. In the previous episode, Michelle had caught a grouse and had a hearty meal, while the other three survived on mussels, leading a miserable existence. Now, with 39 days left, Wanya was ready to reveal her secret weapon. It was not just a warm sweater, but could potentially influence the outcome of the competition, since the sweater was not counted among the allowed 10 items of equipment. Wanya had made it oversized and now planned to unravel the yarn from the neck and sleeves to mark her traps. She had prepared extensively for the competition, practicing her cooking skills, taking a hunting course, and learning what to eat in the wilderness. She was much stronger now than in her Season 6 appearance. She's going hunting now. Last night, she found rabbit droppings and decided to set traps along the rabbit's usual paths. She has lost a lot of weight over the past 10 days and urgently needs protein. She marked the traps with yarn overhead. Meanwhile, it has been raining constantly in Callie's area, and she's on her period, which makes survival even more challenging due to nausea and discomfort. She didn't eat yesterday, leaving her thirsty and hungry. Despite her fatigue, she set out to set a trap for grouse, spotting feathers in an area that seemed active. She used a central pole with a circle of sticks around it, securing them with rope and inserting pine branches at the base. The trap works 24/7, allowing Callie to attend to other tasks. She added a trigger to the central pole and used berries and beach grass as bait. When a grouse steps on the stick to reach the bait, it triggers the mechanism, causing the bird to fall into the trap, which is narrowly constructed at the bottom to restrict the grouse's wing movement. Amos went hunting and set several snares. During this, he noticed bear tracks, indicating frequent visits to a food source. Following the tracks, he found the bear's territory with its sleeping spot, surrounded by bear droppings and animal remains, emitting a strong odor. He prepared his arrows, ready to shoot a bear if encountered. Suddenly, he exclaimed as one of his traps had caught a snowshoe hare, a timely addition to his food supply. That night, it became a hearty meat soup. The next day, snow began to fall. Michelle braved the snow in search of food, wandering from the woods to the beach, where she stumbled upon a bird. It was a recently deceased Canada jay, likely attacked by an eagle, now her meal. After inspecting it for insects and finding none, she felt safe to eat it but decided to cook it thoroughly just to be cautious. Once cooked, Michelle eagerly tasted it. Despite the meat being tough, it tasted great, and she thoroughly enjoyed it. Elsewhere, Callie had set several traps and suddenly felt a girlish urge to try sea ice, having never eaten it before. She bit into it, finding it crunchy and slightly salty, reminiscent of salty chips. When she let go, the remaining ice fell and shattered on the ground, amusing her greatly. She then went to check her traps, feeling very hungry and increasingly thin, which alarmed her. In Season 7, she had endured so long that it caused permanent damage to her body, a situation she did not want to experience again. Unfortunately, both her traps and snares came up empty, leaving her deeply disappointed. Just a few weeks into the competition, she was already in a dire state, which brought her to tears. She could not let her body go through that nightmare again. If she couldn't find food in the next few days, she would really have to withdraw from the competition. Wanya, despite being hungry, was doing laundry. She is a principled woman who dedicates one day each week to washing her clothes. Now she went to check her traps, hoping to find something to eat. However, the first trap was empty. It had taken Wanya 2 years to recover physically from her Arctic experience, which had severely damaged her teeth due to malnutrition causing the enamel to fall off. She had to get 14 fillings and 2 dental implants. Therefore, she would quit the competition before reaching such physical damage again. Food was essential if she wanted to continue in the competition. Fortunately, her luck turned when she caught a rabbit in one of her traps. Overjoyed and tearful, Wania was grateful for the rabbit's sacrifice, which would rejuvenate her weakened body. With a heart full of gratitude, she butchered the rabbit and made a delicious dinner. Tasting the rabbit meat, its aroma instantly delighted her, sending a wave of satisfaction through her mind. She couldn't help but reflect, life is like a dream, so surreal. In this life, I wish to be a gourmet. The next day was a rare, sunny one. Facing the sea, Callie felt as if spring had arrived in her heart. She believed a positive attitude could bring good luck. As she went to check her traps, she spotted a grouse. Its beautiful appearance suggested that it would taste delicious. However, Callie was very weak. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, making it difficult to draw her bow as usual. Her only option was to get close enough to the grouse and muster all her strength to make one final shot. The arrow, carrying her hopes, did not disappoint. Holding the grouse, she couldn't stop smiling, overwhelmed with joy, and she kept kissing it. She hurried to cook, starving as she was. She quickly put the chicken in the pot to boil and added some wild greens. The aroma made her even hungrier, but soon she could eat. She started with a chicken leg, its tender meat melting in her mouth. She closed her eyes, savoring the pleasure, and couldn't help but moan. This grouse brought her hope. Amos had slept well the night before, even dreaming about wrestling with a cougar, which he took as a sign of forthcoming good luck. He decided to check his traps and go hunting. Given his body weight, he estimated he needed about 2,000 calories a day, equivalent to about 2.5 wild rabbits. Suddenly, Amos found a dead grouse on a branch. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was the one he had shot days earlier that had escaped, now pecked at by birds and left with little meat. He hung it on a branch as bait to lure a bear and continued searching. He eventually found the arrow he had shot it with. Since each person was only allowed to carry 10 arrows, recovering them was crucial. Then, as luck would have it, another grouse flew by. Amos quickly shot an arrow but missed. He shot again, and this time he hit the target directly. Though the grouse struggled, it was too weak to escape. Amos smirked, thinking hunting was not so hard after all. This was his first time hunting grouse, and he planned to make a delicious soup. Soon the shelter was filled with a tempting aroma, and Amos enjoyed his meal immensely. He felt increasingly better. That night, a strong wind picked up outside. The damp and chilly weather was on its way, leaving everyone feeling a bit uneasy. In the last episode, Amos caught a rabbit and a grouse. Although it was a good catch, his large frame required more protein. Michelle found a Canada jay on the beach. Callie successfully hunted a grouse, and Wania trapped a rabbit. Everyone was striving to survive with only 35 days left. Wania experienced a very cold night, and a fox had visited her camp, digging through her tarp. She decided to set a trap near her camp to try catching the fox. Using a few small trees and some modifications, she created a natural trap, enclosing it with branches and leaving an entrance. She placed the remains of a rabbit from a few days ago inside as a deadly lure and wrapped some wire around the entrance. Wania wore gloves to avoid leaving human scent on the trap. Now, the trap was set, and she just had to wait. The next morning, Wania was very disappointed. She had heard a fox during the night and knew the trap had been triggered. However, unable to find her headlamp and not daring to check in the dark, she stayed inside. By morning, the fox had escaped, likely having trapped its foot while jumping. Had it been caught by the neck, it wouldn't have escaped. Indeed, she found a footprint of the fox on the ground. The fox had made a tough decision to struggle free, but it was injured and likely couldn't have gone far. Wania searched the area but couldn't find the fox, feeling deeply saddened by the thought of it struggling to survive on its own, which brought tears to her eyes.